Thank you so much, Peter. That was fantastic. And I'm really excited that you can join us here live tonight from the interval. We're able to have both of us here in the studio, although across the room. So welcome. Thank you for joining us.
It's great to be here. It's actually interesting to watch yourself as opposed to actually performing it and coming off that talk. So it's interesting to watch me talk to you.
Nice. Cool. Well, I mean, I think it's especially interesting to, in the middle of a pandemic, to have a positive view of the future. And I think it's welcome. And I think, as you and I have both discussed, the Roaring '20s came out of the last pandemic. And I think it's important to know that at least there is a version of the world that can be much more positive than the one that we're currently living in. So I want to especially thank you for that, because I think it's a difficult project to do now. And I think we need it. But I want to just talk a little bit about that, in that you do mention this kind of storytelling trap, and most of these things having positive outcomes. Of course, there's going to be some things that have negative outcomes, or a weird thing like a pandemic or a comet strike, or who knows what it's going to be. There'll be something that happens in the next 30 years that is negative. And how do you want to address that in context of this piece?
Well, one of the ways I think about this is the culture itself is just filled with all kinds of dystopian rolls out in all kinds of ways of all the disasters are going to happen. I mean, any sci-fi programs, TV shows, magazine articles, cover stories, and all the thing we're just bombarded with this. So one of the things I'm trying to do is overcompensate, and it's a conscious choice of trying to stress that what is getting lost in this look ahead in the future is essentially all these positive developments that are inexorably kind of going along. They're kind of in the backdrop. They don't get the same drama. I mean, the rise of the middle class globally, the rise of, the kind of urbanization, that's a positive thing. I mean, these things are just backdrop statistics that occasionally surface and people miss. And so in many respects, in this story, I'm just trying to focus on that, knowing full well that there's going to be a completely crazy bunch of things that are going to come up here, including wild cards that'll set us back. For sure, it's going to happen, and it will happen. It's kind of, basically, it's kind of the one step forward, two steps back, two steps forward, one step back. I mean, that's just the way progress happens. That's the way technology rolls out. That's the way kind of economic booms happen. We're going to go into a crazy period of time here, and there is absolutely going to be a lot of negative stuff that's going to happen, and there are going to be times where we'll be wringing our hands thinking, oh my God, it's over. But I think what I'm just trying to lay out there is what is missing. And largely missing, certainly when I started this project, it was like you couldn't even find anybody kind of trying to talk about the positives of the next 10, 20, 30 years. I will say it's shifted differently. Literally just in the last couple of months, you're starting to watch a kind of a conventional kind of a news way to frame that, coming off the pandemic with the pent-up consumer demand, and you're going to watch with the vaccines coming together and actually opening up the economy again, that you're going to see some kind of a boom. I think of that as relatively short-term consumer boom, kind of the beginnings of, like you say, the post-pandemic kind of roaring '20s. That is a for sure true thing. It is happening, and it will happen. But I think what I'm trying to get at is these deeper things that'll keep playing out for 10, 20, 30 years, and that we haven't really thought through fully what it all means. I mean, if we are going to shift even the vast majority of our energy system on the planet to clean energies over the course of the next 30 years. I mean, just think of the economic opportunity of that, and just think about the scale of change that's going to be needed, and just think of all the businesses and jobs and all this kind of stuff. I mean, people kind of know it at some level, and they kind of think, okay, yeah, somehow we got to do this, but they haven't really thought it through. And I think when you do think that through, and you do think that through all these other things, these inexorables I was telling you, and see them in synergistic kind of alignment, it really makes you think, oh my God, maybe we are heading back into something that is going to be quite extraordinary.
Indeed. Well, I'm going to move over to some questions from our feed. And then we also have one of the people you mentioned, one of our founders, Kevin Kelly, who will be joining us on the stream. But we have one of our other founders you mentioned, Stuart Brand, watching on the feed and sending a question by text. He says, Pete, why is it easier for people to understand and believe a negative scenario than a positive one?
Stuart, that is a great question. I've been thinking about it for the longest time. My basic way of thinking about it is, again, with the long lens of kind of long now thinking, is I just think humans have been wired from the beginning to actually be anxious and afraid. The rustle in the bushes, it was those humans that heard the rustle in the bushes and freaked out like it was the freaking lion that actually survived, in a way that the person that just was a little more la-di-da, not worried about it, and kind of blue sky thinking, oh, it's nothing. And then they got, they didn't move on. And so I think it's really just in us. It's just baked into humans of just to actually be constantly anxious about everything. And it's been a survival thing. It's been something that's just right there. So I think it plays into, that's one thing I think that happens is people when they think about the future, they think they go into it with fear. That's one thing that's interesting. The other thing I would say is, just from the point of view of someone who's been doing this and as through Wired and Global Business Network, where I actually work with Stuart, it's just so much easier to do negative scenarios. I mean, it's just easy to unwind anything, just blow stuff up, make things bad, people turn out evil. It's like easy. And that's why every damn, cheap movie, B movie, TV show that's barely, thought through, it's all negative and it's all just spins out disasters, right? Easy to do. Much harder to make a compelling, positive scenario, much harder to make it exciting and engaging that people can actually see positive things coming together. Now, I think I've been kind of proselytizing we should have a thing called a genre of movie called blue sky sci-fi. I think, honestly, we could actually have a whole category of these things where people spin out actually positive features and ways things work. And it hasn't happened. Maybe there's some just formula that just never works. But my gut feeling is, particularly with these younger generations, they want a can-do, forward-thinking, this could work frame, as much as, oh my God, we're doomed, it's all going to go to hell. And I think it might have been, that was more of a boomer thing. Maybe we're going to kind of go into a kind of more uplifting period here where, people will just as soon kind of see the positive stories, TV shows, books, conversations, whatever. That's a little more speculative for me, but I would say easier to do. And also, people just are wired to freak out, and they're not wired to actually think confidently and thoroughly and consistently about the future. That's what we need to do. That's part of the long-range thinking. And I think one of the things that Long Now's been doing, and I think one of the things this community's been doing, is trying to structurally and rigorously think forward, and also often with a positive and more optimistic frame. I think it's an indispensable thing that this community does.
I mean, I think also one of the ways that we create a positive future is by envisioning negative ones and creating the antibodies as a way, and creating the kind of the story that we don't want to have come true. And so that's, in some way, that's one of the ways we create this negative future, so that we tell that story enough that we invent the things that stop it. I think that's entirely possible.
I think that's true, but I think there's just enough of that going on that, boy, we need a few more of those positive ones in there. I think it's gotten the zeitgeist of despair in this country and in the world in the last 3 to 5 years has just been debilitating. I mean, I think it's just gone on too much. And we need to kind of counter. And I think we actually are starting to see the counter forces starting to pop up here. I think people are ready for a positive reframe.
Well, I'm going to ask one more kind of question on urbanization before we jump over to Kevin Kelly. We have several people asking questions about urbanization, and I wanted to ask about it too. I mean, obviously, one of the biggest reasons we could have a reversal trend against urbanization was something like a pandemic. And we're seeing that to some extent, at least getting people further out to the suburbs. San Francisco and New York and LA are we're seeing now a decrease in population, which, Christy from our feed points out. And on top of that, we have these connectivity trends, which are allowing people knowledge workers at least, work from more remotely. And so I just wanted to ask, what is your take on that trend, both of de-urbanization, and are there limits to the urbanization that we currently have that we're going to see?
Interesting question. It's one that everyone's hanging on here. My quick hit on both, two kind of points I'd really like to make is, cities have always emptied out in pandemics, and they've always recovered and always come back, and they've come back stronger and bigger and whatever, for always. There is something, just like I said, there's something wired in humans to kind of freak out about the rustle in the bushes. There's also a fundamental piece of us social animals, particularly ones who like physical intimacy and, frankly, sex and connection with people in a way that goes beyond the virtual, that I think is just this inexorable pull that the cities are going to have. Now, that said, So I'm not counting out the cities on the coast and all. San Francisco, it's been told it's been dead for how many times, and it just keeps coming back. But I do think what is interesting about this next phase is because of the high bandwidth connectivity and because of the virtualization of so much, which, by the way, is going to get even more with virtual reality and all the stuff that's going to go even deeper immersion of virtualizing things. I do think we're going to see a revitalization of cities in the heartland, smaller cities all through the place. I mean, you're watching it right now. A lot of people, frankly, the superstar cities were just getting unlivable for everybody. I mean, no one could buy houses. You couldn't move in traffic around here and stuff. I mean, in some ways, people are just in the Bay Area here where I'm in and where you are is like, finally, we can just drive around and finally we can actually do some things that have just been so hard to do.
Right. Yeah. Now, talking with kids who are starting college this year, they are pretty ready to get out of their homes and dorm rooms and get back to a party for sure. All right, so we're going to invite one of our founders and one of the people you referenced in the talk, Kevin Kelly, who worked with you a little bit on this piece as you were developing it.
I will say,
Kevin,
I've had many conversations with Kevin, and he has been very instrumental in helping in this project and helping influence my thinking over the last 25 years. Absolutely. Thank you, Kevin.
So glad to be here. You did a great talk, Pete. I was inspired. I want to be part of that future. Please, let's make it happen.
I'm down with it. Let's do it.
So, one of the questions I would have is, what kind of reaction do you get when you tell this very positive story to people? Maybe people who have heard only the pessimistic view. Do they find it persuasive? Are they able to believe in it? In general, are you able to convert people?
That's an interesting question. I would say people are wired. What's wrong? The wrong word. Wired. People, their knee-jerk reaction to it is, "Oh, that's too positive. You can't be too positive. That's just not how the world works. It's not workable. It's dead end. It's not a non-starter." I mean, that's honestly, and there's a lot of super smart people who, when you talk about this, it's just, oh, no. And I think there's something weird about that. I think what it is I think educated people, intellectuals particularly, are kind of raised and are just surrounded by news, magazine analysis, books. I mean, all the kind of intellectual thing is I would just put a number on it. 80% of it is somehow negative, And there's a lot of people kind of wringing their hands about the negativity of news and stuff. But when you're kind of in an environment like that constantly, and it's just seeped into your pores, it's just the way you think about everything. When someone comes around with a totally different way that's positive and reframed and kind of has, it's thought of as naive, or it's thought of as like, oh, that can't be right, or anyhow, there's just some weird thing. So yeah, it's a frustrating thing. I will say this, it's not just this project I've been doing this. I've been doing this for the last 25 years. I've been doing a lot of public speaking, and I'm always positively saying it. I will say this, people love at least to go for the ride, for the hour-long talk or something. They actually like to do it because it's so rare to do it. And they're kind of like, wow, wouldn't that be cool? There's a lot of them that actually do that. And so, I don't think it's a lost cause to push that rock up the hill, but I do think, because I think people are open to it, and when they see it, they have a thrill for it, but then they pretty much settle back into their negative space. So I think it's more like maybe building a movement or building a body, a consistent media landscape that has more of this. I don't know. It needs more voices. It needs more energy. It needs more ideas. And I know you've been thinking about this too, with your Protopia thing. I mean, I think people need things to hang on to. They need to grab it. They need stuff. And that's really what this project was just let's get something in writing, which is where in Medium, by the way, anyone could watch this, The Transformation. It's a series of 6 stories in there. This talk will be one, and other venues, and I'm going to kind of keep pushing this because we just need to keep banging the drum that you got to stay open to this and really not only open to it, but really engage it seriously and think, why not? I mean, why isn't the narrative right now that we're on the cusp of an amazing era of reinvention of America, amazing era of scaling up like, to solve global problems, to kind of harness AI and take advantage of biological engineering. And why isn't there this kind of totally, you could imagine a narrative of that. It's based on the tools, the reality. There's people doing it in a million different directions, but that's not the narrative. The narrative is this, everything's screwed up, everything's going to go wrong, everything's going to, AI is going to overrule us, biotech is going to, we're all going to be, mutants. And anyhow, the whole story. It worries me, but it's something I'm doing my best to counter as best I can.
So your vision, your story has a little bit of a very global kind of tech view. The politics are very U.S. focused. I increasingly have come to believe that more and more the future is going to be decided by non-Americans, the young non-Americans of the world that you kind of hint at. And do you have a sense of their politics? And wouldn't that be a better audience for this talk, is the young of China and India? Because in a certain sense, those are the people who are going to be making our future.
Good point. I know that's something that you've always championed. And one of the exciting things about the connectivity that's to come, and this, again, kind of interconnection through language and understanding, is going to come with that potential to do that. I mean, right now it's hard to figure out a way to actually communicate and really get your ideas out that way. So anyhow, it is something that I know that's maybe not the best way to answer your question, but I do think to the extent we're going to be able to kind of proselytize and spread the word, I think what it is for those of us in the West here is to actually help energize and help empower essentially the folks that I do think will build the future. I'm a little worried about the Chinese way. I do think there's still two systems existing right now. And although the liberal democracy world is kind of decadent and not working very well, I'm a little concerned about a kind of more authoritarian kind of Chinese version, and to what extent that's I think of it that they're comparable. There's trade-offs with both, and I think that's why I see them as allies in the solving climate change thing. But I don't know if I don't know which is better in the long run, and I'm still not kind of going that as far as that.
So maybe my last question is, I'm with you that we don't really need to drum up more dystopians and negative scenarios, because there's machines that do that already very well. But I am interested if you had a magic wand that could remove one hurdle, the biggest hurdle you see for this vision coming true, what would that one hurdle that you would like to see be removed? What is the sort of the biggest headwind against this happening?
Wow, that is an interesting one. From the global point of view, or from the American point of view?
No, from the global point of view.
If it was a magic wand, if I could literally just do a magic wand. To me, what's missing, maybe this isn't as big enough to swing with my magic wand that I have, but I think what I think is missing right now is people cannot comprehend, they cannot think, they cannot envision, they can't see how a better future works in a kind of more comprehensive way. They don't understand how could the economy work to be more kind of equitable and kind of rework wealth differently and deal with mitigating inequality. They don't understand how would we really solve climate change in the reasonable time here to kind of stay under the kind of global warming kind of levels that we got to worry about. They don't see how would you rethink a more global world that is kind of working on a planetary scale and, beyond the borders of a bunch of collection nation states. I mean, there's a bunch of things that people are they don't get it. And so they hang back and they hold in their kind of position. And they even look backwards and say, well, God, wouldn't it be good if we just did it what we did in the 20th century? Or, some people are going back all the way to the founding fathers and saying, originalists, do what they did, in the 1780s. Like, anyhow, it's a backward looking thing. But I think what's happening is it's hard to envision that future. It's hard to see it. And if there's some way, maybe it's different kind of media, different kind of thinking, different kind of mental tools or something that would just help people see more clearly, rigorously, thoroughly, comprehensively what could lie ahead. I think it would energize people to start doing it in a way. I think it's right now it's missing. The missing piece is the envisioning piece, and not in a kind of trite way of just, oh, we'll build a better life and we're all going to be better. It's like, how do these future systems work? How could they work? Can I mortgage my future on it? Can I mortgage my kids' future on it? Can I, move in that direction? Can I let go of my own career and move into that career? I mean, it's hard for people to see that. And that's why I think the whole field of futurism, and I think the whole field of kind of thinking systematically about the future is so valuable. And it's so still crude and still kind of unformed. And I think, boy, if I had a magic wand, some way we could just do that with more kind of crispness and clarity, and to make things more convincing, I think it would be awesome. And it would mobilize political will and energy in new ways that I think we're lost right now because we can't make people see it. And this is my little vague way of, in this talk or in this series, showing one way that if you just suspend disbelief a little bit and think about it, it's just helping people see that through line, see what's out there. It's a pale attempt. It's one attempt, but boy, we need more of us doing it. That's what I would say. Here's my wand.
Well, your magic worked on me this evening, so thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's always good to hear that from you, Kevin. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Kevin. Really appreciate you joining us tonight. We're wrapping up the Q&A right now. We're past the top of the hour. I will say this talk generated more online questions than I think any one of our online talks so far. So you've definitely got people's attention. But we have several questions, one from Nick, one from Michael Hertz, on this kind of where does decentralization and centralization play out? And I think, we see forces of centralization right now, obviously in the big, huge tech companies like Facebook, and Apple, and these kind of silos of technology that are owning Google, that are owning so much of our online world. We see versions of decentralization with forces like more open web type sources like Wikipedia winning out over Britannica, or these Craigslist largely winning out over online classifieds of other types. And I think now we have other forces that are kind of coming in sideways to that, like cryptocurrency, obviously being another decentralizing force that are potentially an economic decentralizing force. And so I just wanted you to, if you have a chance to talk a bit about where centralization and decentralization, both either technology and economics, work out in this.
Yeah, good question. And for those who asked it, and yourself too asked it, here's the way I'm thinking about it is, in the relative short term, I think the forces of decentralization are actually going to be where the energy is going to go. And I think, the era of, the nation state, we all look to, Biden and his cabinet to solve everything. That era is less and less a thing. That was kind of a thing, and it was a 20th century thing more. It can be less and less. It's more like, oh, what's California doing? Or what's the crypto crew, energizing, some outfit in, whatever, another country. Anyhow, I think there is a decentralized thing. I think this also includes tech. I think, but here's the difference. So there's a decentralizing thing that I think is still the predominant thing, energy of where the era is going to go. But here's the problem, and it's an interesting switch. And I spent a lot of time thinking about this as I talk more civilizationally. We didn't really get into that in this part of the talk. Just you can only do so much in 35 minutes. But the ultimate challenge that's going to happen to the planet, particularly if we try to solve climate change in a way that's going to work, is we have to operate on a planetary scale. And it seems to me that there's going to have to be some kind of global governance at some level, or global coordination, that I don't necessarily think it would be centralized, like it's going to be some little cabal of people that runs the global planet, but there is some kind of another level of world historical, not centralization, but coordination at a global level that we've never seen before, that we're going to need. That's going to happen, I would say, increasingly in the next 30 years, but across the century, that is going to be a thing. But anyhow, and so it's this global reconnection at a global level beyond the boundaries of states, and and nations and stuff, that is an energy that's going to take the whole century to figure out. But basically, that thing is what's also screwing up and countering this decentralization thing. So, for example, the reason these tech companies are all so huge right now, there's just one simple reason. The digital environment is totally global. There's no boundaries on that. And so when Facebook can have 2.5 billion people on their platform, and that was only because there's a global economy they're seamlessly tied into, right? So, but that's not because, that's the best way to organize social media is, centralized. It's just like, hey, 15 years ago, they started this thing. The borders were open globally. They scaled. They just kept scaling. And in fact, frankly, they didn't even know what hit them. They grew so fast. Now they're like, holy shit, what are we? Now we're the most powerful companies in the world. I mean, I think this is the thing that people overestimate. They think that all these tech titans, were these wanted to take over the world. No, they didn't even know what to hit them. There's like, this is wild ride for them as it is for anybody to watch this happen. So I think it's not like that's the most successful way to go. It's that that's the scale we're starting to work at is globally. And so I think it still is nimble, decentralized, innovative. All that thing is still better. And ultimately, we're going to see Facebook and all these are going to go the way of, IBM and, the whole thing. I mean, it's like, we're going to watch this cycle again. Who's going to be the next updraft? Is it Zoom or whatever? Anyhow, there'll be something. But it's not because the superior thing is, the big centralized thing. It's essentially this scaling thing that we haven't really thought through fully and we haven't really understood. And that is going to be one of the biggest challenges in the next 30 years is going to be figuring out how do we do that? Because it's inevitable. That one I'll say is inevitable. It's inexorable too, but it's like by the end of the century, we're going to organize the planet on it's going to be one system. It is already one system at some level. We just haven't figured out how to do it very well right yet. But it's going to happen. Again, I'm an optimist, so I'll say we'll see.
Well, and that leads perfectly into our last question. We have several questions really on, on growth economics, growth of everything. We know one of the other things, the inexorables and demographics that's going to happen in the next 30 to 50 years is peak population. And we already see it, as I said, in the developing or developed world, and we're going to see it in the developing world where populations are starting to go down. And so economics are likely going to have to start shifting in the way that they work. So I'm just wondering, do we think that there's going to need to be different economic models? I think when you published this story, and for instance, there was a book came out called Dow 30,000, which everyone totally ridiculed. And strangely, we actually hit it in the middle of a pandemic, certainly maybe a little bit later than that person expected, but we did hit it and went blew right past it in the middle of what should have been the most global economic downturn that we've ever had. So clearly these things are starting to decouple already from normal human trends and demographics to other things. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on where growth leads in the next 30 years and how that plays out in this world.
Well, okay, I thought you were going to go in a different direction than that, but I'll say two things about this, which I think is interesting. So what you mentioned is in the 90s when we kind of projected out to 2020, it was true. On top of a tech boom and an economic boom, the stock market was going to go. We didn't push it, but it was clearly the thing. And in fact, it happened. But here's the thing, is it was, again, that was a thing of, the scaling thing. It's just like people don't understand exponential. That's one of the, actually, if you really want to get down to it, is most people don't understand what exponential growth is. And I was trying to show it in those charts about how it's happening now in energy, it's happening in biotech, and we've been happening in infotech. And so these things go from manageable and understandable to like, holy shit, how did that happen? kind of thing. And so I think that's kind of, if you just heard my talk here, I'm not going to be telling you, the stock market should collapse tomorrow and it's all a bubble. I'm not saying, the current stock market and the choices are, necessarily the future. But I would say there is going to be an insane amount of wealth to be made in the future here. And I think we're going to watch that happen. Now, the critical piece of this, which is I thought was what you're going to go to, is it cannot happen on the old technologies and the old carbon energies. If that happens, we're screwed. I mean, we're totally doomed, honestly. But I think this is the beauty of what the moment we're in here is we can actually grow the entire global economy on clean energy, sustainable everything. The way I say this is like, synthetic biology, packaging will be, grown rather than kind of plastic and petrochemicals. Anyhow, all that kind of stuff. We know how to do this now. Now, we don't know how to do everything about it, but we're past the tipping point of understanding that. One last little thing I'll say about this, which is a good way to think about this, which is we are so lucky that the pandemic hit in 2020 rather than just 20 years ago in 2000. If we would have hit 20 years ago in 2000, the same pandemic, there would have been about 25 million, 50 million Americans online and nobody else. You wouldn't have had these open channel video things all over the world. You wouldn't have had scientists coordinating all over the planet. You wouldn't have kids being able to go to school on video. Everybody work from home. That gone 20 years ago. That's all it would have taken. Second thing is we wouldn't even have cracked the first human genome. We didn't even know how to do a genome. And now we're following the virus as it's mutating by the day, and it's like everybody can do it and they share it instantaneously. That couldn't have happened. And the same thing was we crashed the global economy. We paused the global economy, and all the oil industry crashed, and everything crashed. If this would have been 20 years ago, there's no way we could have scaled back up on clean energy like solar or wind or any of that. It was so immature, it wasn't there. So anyhow, the point is, we're lucky it's today. The triple whammy happened today. We're lucky because we could actually do all that amazing. Think what's going to happen in another 10, 20, 30 years. We're going to be increasingly lucky that, we could solve the global climate crisis of 2040 because holy shit, everybody has AI enabled everything, and we got sensors all over the planet, blah blah blah. Anyhow, there's a bunch of ways that happens. So I just think we need to keep thinking how this is possible, and we got to keep our minds open, our imaginations over what could happen in the next 10, 20, 30 years as this happens. And I think we're past the point where we now can actually grow the global economy robustly and still not blow out the planet and do it on a sustainable kind of everything plan. And, it's not going to be perfect. It's going to be one step forward, two steps back kind of thing, as we mentioned. But over time, if we have this conversation in 2050, most of this will largely have played out. This is what I'm trying to say.
Nice. Well, we want to extend the invite for you to come back in February of 2050 to report back on the things that came out as planned and the big surprises that hit us over the
I will do it,
next
and
30
as
years.
long as the interval's open and you can actually get a drink rather than kind of been sitting in a pandemic like this. But yes, by that time we won't have to worry about pandemics. Yes, I will do that. Looking forward to it. I'm also looking forward to being part of this community in the next 25 years here, 30 years to it. And thanks for having me here.
Indeed. Well, we'll step outside and have a rare interval drink outside shortly after this talk. So thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
And I want to thank you, our Long Now audience, for sticking with us during this pandemic and during these pre-recorded talks. We'll have more coming up in the future, and thank you so much.